Hi there everyone, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. Some people view AI as an affront to humanity, while other people see it as a tool that people can use. Though, if you happen to use it as a tool, it might be a good idea to monitor what was created through it. Also, sorry if I sound a bit off today in my reactions, as I am a bit sick and seem to be losing my voice. But with that said, to the post. Am I the asshole? Criticizing my player for not reading his own backstory. By Reddit user, Common Consequence 95. Some context. I have been dungeon mastering for about 5 years, but I had only ever DM'd for a group of friends. All of our campaigns end up being cancelled over scheduling conflicts. I've been eager to DM a campaign that goes on till the end, to actually finish a campaign. For that reason, I went to the D&D Beyond Discord and recruited some players for a campaign that I spent the past few months writing up. This campaign is run completely online over Discord and Roll20. Hey, there is no shame in running a game with Roll20 and Discord for video chat. Heck, that is how my group continued our campaign after the pandemic hit, and it just turned out to be the best way that we could all make it. So there's nothing wrong with that at all. I had previously posted here for advice on DMing for people I'm not familiar with, and the two most common pieces of advice were running a good session 0 and having one-on-ones with my players to talk about their characters. So I went on to do exactly that. Honestly, that is some solid advice for a new dungeon master, but sometimes even the best advice cannot fix certain things. I ran a session 0 outlining the campaign, some house rules, and most importantly, that I would like the players to have good backstories. I said that I want to see characters develop and have meaningful character arcs. To accompany this, I had mentioned that a lot of the kingdoms in said campaign had been purposely laid out with general frameworks so that the players' backstories can add to them. An example is one of my players adding that a kingdom, which I planned to be inspired by Japanese culture, added that maybe they view tieflings in the same way that Oni are depicted. I loved it, and it fit in perfectly. For this to work out as best as it could, I told everyone that I would be scheduling to have a one-on-one with them in order to talk more about their characters and flesh out their backstories. Again, not a bad way at all to start a campaign. Heck, that is how my group started a Saltmarsh campaign. Though, unfortunately, it didn't matter in the end, since our DM just got swamped with work not long after, so we had to cut the campaign off. But I still want to play my cleric Furbolg someday. Anyways, my ADD got the best of me there, so let's continue. Cut to the player that I ended up having the issue with. He sent in a backstory and let me know that he had AI write it. I know that some people would be very against it, but personally, I wasn't, until now. I had the impression that he had an idea for a backstory, but just used AI to write it out for clarity. With that being my understanding, I told him that I'm perfectly fine with it, as long as he understood the backstory himself as well. We scheduled our one-on-one, which ended up being pretty late for me, about 11:30 p.m. my time. 30 minutes before our one-on-one, he sent me a message saying that he won't be able to answer questions about his backstory because he hadn't read it. I was a bit taken aback by this. I responded, saying that the entire point of the one-on-one is talking about the backstory, so he needs to read it. I told him we could delay the one-on-one for the same time the next day, though he says that if I want him to be able to answer the questions, he needs to know what the questions will be. I said that they were more topics of discussion, which is why it's easier to do it in a call, but I sent him the questions anyway. He responded with mostly not useful answers, which I expected because it's easier to talk about them in a call. One thing in particular that annoyed me was a question in regards to something stated in his backstory. His backstory talks about one of the kingdoms having some sort of virus causing decay, which is what his character sets off to do first. When I asked about it, he didn't even know what I was talking about. I rephrased and used the word plagued because that's how his backstory describes it, though he still didn't know what I was referring to. Okay, now I can understand if you aren't great at writing, but have an idea for a character, and use something like ChatGPT or Grok to flesh it out for you. Though I think you at least have to have the idea of the character in mind, and read what comes out afterwards. At this point, I was just annoyed. I felt like he just didn't care about his own backstory, like he wasn't engaged with his character at all. So I sent him a screenshot of his own backstory that talked about what I was referring to, and said, like I said, I'm fine with the use of AI to write out the backstory, but you should, at the bare minimum, know what's even in it. He responded, saying that it was all written by AI, and that it was up to me to decide if it was accurate or not, because it was my world. I responded, very annoyed and fed up. I said that's what the one-on-one is for, to talk about what works and what doesn't, what can be implemented and what can't. But when your entire backstory is written by AI and you don't even read it, then how are we even meant to talk about it? He said it just sounded like I wanted to argue because it's, quote, my world and I, as the DM, make the choices. Despite that, I said in Session 0 that I'm open for players to add on to the basic framework that I had set for the world. He proceeded to say that he's dropping out of the campaign, which, to be honest, I was a little relieved, because I was contemplating whether I wanted to keep him as a player or not. I'm honestly not sure if I was being unreasonable. So I ask, was I the asshole? No, OP was in no way the asshole here. Like OP said, he could understand if a player would come up with a character concept and use AI to flesh it out and make it readable if the player was unable to do so himself. But it sounds like the player just went to an AI and said, "Make me a D&D character," then refused to even read it. It just sounds like to me that he was waiting for OP to read it first and approve or disapprove it without even being bothered to read it himself. Now look, my views on AI are likely different from others, as I view it as a tool that can be used to help enhance things that people who usually can't do something do. I think it's just another advancement in our human condition that will be used for good and bad, much like every other advancement our species has developed. But that is just my view, and I do try to understand other people's viewpoints. I just think that it can be used for good, as long as it's supplemental, not the primary. Thus why I still read and record these stories with my own voice, even though it takes me a long time, and it would be a whole lot easier to train an AI on my voice. Because there is just something lost in the human connection when an AI voice that doesn't have any feeling or emphasis on things reads stuff, and it just sounds robotic in nature. But anyway, I think I may have gotten a bit too hung up on the whole thing. So my leading thoughts on this story is that, sure, use AI to help clean up an idea that you may have for a character, but you still need to have the soul of your idea in there somewhere. Not just have an AI make your character for you. But with that said, let's continue on with our next D&D horror story, where a dungeon master basically decides to just kill off a player's character for a really stupid reason. To the post. Dungeon master kills my character, then won't let me play anything else. By Reddit user Apprehensive Slip 754. So, a little bit of context. Our party has a lot of inspiration from third-party mediums. Think movies, shows, etc. Our dungeon master has also openly said, quote, "My entire job is to try and kill you," and won't give any room for character-to-character roleplay or creative solutions. Anyways, back to my rant. During a game where some of our players couldn't attend, he thought it would be a fun idea to run a side quest, which started out alright and fun. Getting paid out for this massive quest that we spent almost half a year of in real life time doing. However, mid-fight, he decided it would be fun to quote-unquote corrupt my character, and then have me fight against my party members for 3 turns, which was alright, until someone cast Dispel Magic to lift this corruption from my character. Instead, my dungeon master decided this was a good moment to use that spell to completely wipe my character's mind from existence. I was playing a Warforged. His reasoning? It's like wiping a hard drive. I mean, fair, sure, whatever. Only to later come back on it and say, I've done some more reading on the spell, and it's not how the spell works, so, oops. So basically, I died for no reason. Now, because of conflicting scheduling and group activities, we haven't had much time to play for 4 weeks now, during which time I've thought of and fleshed out a couple characters, and every single one is being shot down for one reason or another. From, this is literally X character, when I wanted to do a spin on the existing old man trope, to, evil characters are banned, when I wanted to try something new with a chaotic good sorcerer, while we literally have someone playing the Son of Death in our campaign. It has come to the point where I've made quote-unquote human, a human fighter with no personality, no backstory, just a Russian accent, which will undoubtedly be denied for being unoriginal. Well, at this point, I would say to talk to the DM about your frustration with the killing of your character, and if he's unwilling to hear you out, my suggestion would be to just quit this table and look for another game, whether it be online or in person. Because first, the whole thing with basically killing off OP's Warforged because of Dispel Magic is complete BS. Just that there would have made me quit the game. Then, the Dungeon Master declining all the characters that OP has pitched since then would have been a bridge too far for me. Honestly, this game just sounds like it's a clusterfuck. I mean, what game master would think that a simple Dispel Magic, basically killing off a character without even any rolls, is a good idea? But before we move on to the next RPG horror story, I just have to ask that if you enjoy my videos, that you crit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. If not for me, then how about for this little guy I'm about to introduce, in which I'd like to introduce you all to Boris. My brother adopted that little dude after having to have one of his kitties put down a few months ago, and he is a little firecracker. Also, as always, if you would like to help out more directly, I'll have the Ko-fi and Ko-fi links in the description. And speaking of which, someone by the name of Suki the cat and Nini the human donated $20 and said, "You're my favorite Get Ready podcast to listen to in the mornings. Keep up the great work. With love from my tuxedo girl and I. Get some kitty treats on us." Which I will, as Boris really seems to like the temptation treats. But with that, let's continue our RPG horror story adventures with a tale about a player in a Dark Heresy game that just snaps out of nowhere. To the post.
I made this character because I wanted to be better than other people.
Slams fist on table. By Reddit user Pookie207. Not hyperbole. That's word for word. Followed by slamming his fist on his desk so loudly that it carried over the microphone. This happened a year ago, thereabouts. I'm an admin on a Dark Heresy 2nd Edition Discord server. Yeah, I probably should have banned him right there, maybe even sooner. Though I dismissed it as an emotional outburst at the time, since he had a lengthy record on the server of not doing anything unusual. But over the course of about 6 months, he changed from a normal player to a problem player, having arguments with the DM, or shouting at the DM, etc. The other administrators and I discussed this, and since he had been a good boy for about a year before things started going south for him, we initially dismissed it as some in-real-life issues that he might have been struggling with. No one's life is a rose garden, and as long as it doesn't become a repetitive issue, it can be forgiven once or twice, right? Well, sure. Sometimes someone's personal issues might bleed into a game, but when that happens, it needs to be addressed, and not just treated like a let's wait and see type thing. Nip that problem in the bud right then. At least, that's my view on things. Though, it wasn't once or twice. It became a consistent and persistent problem, with no way to handle him or his outbursts effectively presenting itself. In one of the in-game outbursts, he had made a character with the noble starting background. And if you read this thread's title, you know exactly what happened. A dispute happened over other people being allowed to make command tests, rather than taking orders exclusively from him. He said,
I made this character because I wanted to be better than other people.
Next, he threw a fit over there being a second psyker in the party, quote-unquote,
with the same abilities,
which he then proceeds to cite an ability that the other psyker did not have. Now, incorrect citation of a list of abilities he was provided and incorrectly read as we both listed our spells aside. For those unfamiliar, Dark Heresy 2nd Edition Psychers learn psi skills in a tree format. You have to have some of the same things, unless your specialization is entirely different. And some of the starter tree items are good and cheap. Not having Fatigue Restoration, the only psychic ability actually shared between the characters, is a silly utility to be without. So, I'm not familiar with Dark Heresy, but I imagine that whole situation being like not taking Healing Word at the start of some classes, if you're planning on being a support healer. We tried to discuss this with him, and he claimed that we should have sensed his desire to be the only psyker in the party from the way he was talking, or typing, when we were preparing for the mission and deciding which characters to bring. In the gentlest way possible, we explained that reality doesn't work like that. He was rapidly becoming more and more unhinged, with increasingly detached expectations. Now, to expect people to just know your expectations without communicating with them is just stupid. People are not mind readers. I spoke with the Game Master, who was also an admin, and we had the usual hang-ups. We were too biased because one administrator was the Game Master, and another administrator was a player. I was the other psyker that he was yelling about, in the same mission. How should we have handled this? Well, we debated for about 2 weeks, during which his flagrant disrespect of the Game Master convinces another player to leave the server entirely. Well, can you blame the player for leaving? I mean, this dude was making things uncomfortable, and the two people that could have done something about it were in the same game as the player, as a player and a Game Master, and they didn't do anything about it. I probably would have noped out as well. We came to the initial conclusion to remove him from the mission. Naturally, he protested and insisted that this become
an official server issue,
which resulted in me going over the server rules and violations, and explaining to him that the result would, had he had been treated like a new arrival with no clean record prior, that he would have received 3 server bans. He then complains to the server owner that I'm being tyrannical, though the server owner doesn't buy it, and he winds up with the ban hammer. He had become so unhinged that he negotiated himself from being removed from a 4-session mission and into a server ban. I suppose this is a reminder as to why we can't have nice things. Some people will push for more, and more, and become personally offended when there isn't more after all that. If things aren't clamped down on immediately at the first deviation, they fester and rot. Our tolerance and being patient caused more problems than they solved in the end. Now, I'm not too well versed in the Dark Heresy games, But I wouldn't say that tolerance and patience are not a good thing, just based off the story. But with tolerance and patience should also come communication. And it seems to me like that Game Master and OP just figured that the problem would work itself out. But that hardly ever works. If anything, OP and the Game Master, both being admins of the server, should have pulled the player aside and tried to get to the crux of the issue. Maybe then, they would have come to some sort of compromise with this player, and not lose another one while waiting for things to iron themselves out. Though, I guess in the end, things worked out? I mean, things could have been handled better, but in the end, someone's personal issues should not be placed on other people, especially in a tabletop RPG. Though, talking is always the best policy in my opinion. But what are your thoughts on this one? Could OP and the Game Master have handled things better as admins of the server? If so, what would your suggestions be? Though, with that, let's move on to the next D&D horror story, about a Dungeons & Dragons player that tries to game the system, but then gets mad when the Dungeon Master lays down some boundaries. To the post.
Player says, "I'm allowed to cheat because my character is a wizard."
By Reddit user Toxic Casual. I run a D&D 5th edition campaign with some friends I have known for a long time. It is a small group, 3 regular players, with some occasional guest players. The campaign is well into year 2. Homebrew setting, but fairly strict to 5th edition rules. I put out a primer at the beginning of the campaign, allowing 1 or 2 small things from Critical Role, and the statement saying, well-established homebrew setting items and spells, such as from Critical Role, must be approved by the DM beforehand. Don't show up with a subclass I have no book for on the day that you level. Enter the player. This player is a good friend of mine. He runs some other games that I'm part of. I would never go so far to say that he is a problem player, but he has some tendencies that make him difficult to manage and entertain. He has a bit of an epic main character complex. If the player is not overpowered and winning, then he gets frustrated and uninterested. At times, he forgets the purpose of D&D is to experience the story, not to win at D&D. We've butted heads several times on balancing issues, and the player will tie up my time and hold up the game until I decide to make his wizard more powerful. The previous one was about comparing his wizard's blade singing with a druid's wild shape. I explained to him, in simple terms, that while magical in nature, neither one of them is the result of a spell. Therefore, Dispel Magic would not affect either of them. They argued and took up half an hour of our already short 3-hour playtime that druid's wild shape should be affected by Dispel Magic, but not blade singing. Don't get started with me. I know. Well, I know you said not to get started with you, but blade singing is affected by Dispel Magic. I'm just saying. The latest one that just has me fuming was a petition to allow Widowghast's transmorgification from Critical Role. I read it carefully, considered the advantages and drawbacks, and made my judgment. The player said that for roleplay purposes, he'd like his human wizard to change into an elf. I explained that, per the spell description, he would lose human traits and gain elf traits. That means his character would lose his free human feat and skill. That was the point of conflict. The player insists that there's no way race change would cause you to quote-unquote lose knowledge. I countered with 2 points. First, he claimed that this was for roleplay purposes, so why is he getting hung up on mechanics? Second, this causes balance issues. Once per game year, you could just change races and collect traits, which is practically cheating. The player's mask slipped at this point. His response was,
"Yeah, it's cheating. It's called magic. Magic is cheats. With enough magic, I should be able to do just about anything."
At this point, I was frustrated and just wanted to move on, so I offered this. Either use the spell as intended and as described, or use it purely cosmetically. Your character casts the spell and becomes an elf in appearance only, but permanently. It cannot be dispelled, and no other traits change, just for the sake of my sanity. Though the player refused. I abruptly ended the conversation, and that's where we're at. I kinda don't want a dungeon master anymore. I'm not looking forward to the next game. I kinda want to kick him out, but then his spouse will quit as well, and the game will fall apart. Basically, if I want to continue playing, I have to give the player what he wants every time he feels like he's not quote-unquote winning. Well, I am not that familiar with Widogast's transmogrification, which is something that I imagine is a homebrew from Critical Role, since one of the characters' names is Caleb Widogast. But if it essentially changes a player's character's race from one race to another, you would think that the race features would also change. It just sounds like this player wanted to have his cake and eat it too with this spell. Now, I don't think the player making demands on OP on how the spell should work is fair at all, and I think even with the threat of the player quitting the game, that OP should have put their foot down on this whole thing. I mean, this situation is making OP consider just up and quitting DMing, and that is not a good sign at all. The game is supposed to be fun for both the players and the Dungeon Master, so I would say, tell the player in no uncertain terms what the spell will do. If they don't like it, they can not do it or stop playing. I mean, OP is already on the verge of not DMing anymore, so what is there to lose here? Though, what do you guys think on this one? I mean, communication is key in Dungeons & Dragons, but it sounds like OP already did that part, and this player is just being stubborn. Be sure to let me know what you would do in the comments. But it looks like we have time for one more D&D horror story, where a player gets super angry about not being invited to a game that doesn't even exist. To the post. Player gets mad they aren't invited to a game which doesn't exist. By Reddit user KingRock023. I joined an online tabletop game advertised at college where I had the most experience. For 2 months, everything went smoothly until one session when I casually mentioned a sci-fi world I was developing. I asked for opinions on a couple of factions, with no intention of running a game anytime soon due to my busy schedule. I assumed everyone understood this, but I was mistaken. One of the players, Ben, playing an elf bard, misunderstood and thought I was planning a game without inviting him. Instead of clarifying with me, he adopted a passive-aggressive attitude, portraying his character as a grudge-holding dwarf. Initially, I brushed it off, attributing it to Ben's role-playing style. As sessions progressed, Ben's character became increasingly rude and insulting to both player characters and NPCs alike, behaving like a spoiled child. Eventually, Sarah, another player, confronted him in character, but Ben deflected with more in-character sulking. The situation escalated until the entire party, including our game master Henry, confronted Ben about his disruptive behavior. It was then that Ben openly accused me of excluding him from a game that I wasn't even running, resorting to personal insults and disrupting the game environment. Thankfully, Henry intervened and removed Ben from the call, preventing further conflict. Henry later messaged Ben and removed him from the game due to his combative behavior and baseless accusations. I confirmed with the other players that they understood that I wasn't running a separate game, yet Ben persisted in his misguided belief. Since then, I haven't had any further interactions with Ben. Well, with that, I would say that doesn't sound like that big of a loss. First off, even if OP was making a separate game, they wouldn't have any requirement to invite anyone that they didn't want to. And Ben just showed a sense of entitlement by thinking that he should have been invited. Second, to assume that OP did make a game and start sulking in your current Dungeons & Dragons sessions because of a perceived slight is just childish. I mean, you think this could have been cleared up pretty quickly by OP just saying that they weren't running a game. But in Ben's mind, instead of asking if OP was running a game, he just assumed that he was being left out. Overall, that is a really silly reason to get booted from a D&D game. But this is the world we live in. Though, that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and hope that your games remain horror story free. Until next time.